But a few people ask about my oil changing tank for compressors. This video is for Eagle Mech Services. You should check out his channel. He's got quite a few interesting things. He works on a lot of low temp stuff and racks and you know, not your run-of-the-mill systems. So his channel's well worth checking out. Anyway, I started out with a old disposable refrigerant tank. These have been banned here for probably must be at least 5 years, probably a bit longer. So this one's just been sat around. It's outside in the scrap pile, which is why it's a bit rusty. You start with a tank like this. Make sure it's completely empty. I would then pull a vacuum on it, so you've got rid of all the refrigerant outside, inside it rather, not outside. Some of the refrigerants can be flammable in certain conditions, so personally, if it was me, like I say, I'd want to pull a vacuum on it, and purge it with nitrogen really before you start brazing on it. But anyway, that's what you want to start with. Now I've had this tank for be more than 15 years, be quite a while. It was back in the 90s when we were doing all the CFC conversions on the old R12 systems. So basically what we've done is drilled a hole in here and silver soldered one of these little fittings in there, but anything you could put in there with a thread that you could connect to would be okay. I've got a little T on here, but you could just pipe it. Originally it was piped in with a bit of 1/4 inch copper into the hand valve, which I've put there. And then on the end of the hand valve we've got the flexible line, and that's thin enough. If you take the sump plug out on a compressor, that's thin enough to be able to you can feed it into the bottom of the sump. And once you've got a vacuum in here, you can open that tap and the vacuum will pull the oil out of the sump. So that is where your oil goes in through this one, and you would connect your vacuum pump to the tap here and pull a vacuum. Quite a lot of these tanks, the last few tanks we got here, they've got a check valve in here, so you can't refill them, so you can only ever pull a vacuum on there. You would need to cut that off and braze another valve on if you wanted to use that as a fill, but it works fine as the vacuum connection, and you can, of course, you can shut it off again if you need to. Yeah, so you connect your vacuum pump and the gauge line. I'd use a tatty old one. You're not really, you know, this is a scrap one. I wouldn't put any pressure in this. It's rubber's a bit perished, but it's fine for pulling the vacuum on the tank, because it could well get full of oil, so you don't want to be putting your best lines on there. So with this running, we get a vacuum in here, and they work best if you keep these as empty as you can. You've got a really big reserve of vacuum to pull the oil out really quick. As they fill up, you've got less reservoir vacuum, less volume, because you can pull oil in quicker than you can pull a vacuum, especially if it's got a bit of refrigerant in the oil. Quite often you see it bubbling as it goes up the tube, so keep them empty really. The other thing is you want to be very careful. I have once or twice been caught out where it's filled right up, and you'll actually get oil come out of the hose into the vacuum pump, and it will come out of the exhaust like a little fountain, and you're going to get covered in it before you get a chance to turn the pump off. So that's something to be aware of. But I tend to try and keep these, you know, nearly empty. I wouldn't go over half full with it. So that's that. As for emptying it, I've got this little T on here now, so I could take that off. I could pressurise this with nitrogen, put 5 or 10 pounds in there. I wouldn't really want to go any higher. You don't need to either. And then you could open that tap, turn the bottle upside down, because obviously there's no dip tubes on this. Turn it upside down, open that tap, and the oil will be pushed back out the way it went in, and you can fill a drum up with that, or whatever you do with your waste oil. We did have another one on the company I used to work for. We had a bigger bottle of this. It was probably the sort of the next size up, and on that we brazed in a 1/2 inch or 5/8 flare fitting, and then we had a nut with a bonnet in there, so that was big enough you could just undo the nut, tip the thing up and just tip it out, pour it out, which if you were doing a lot wouldn't be a bad shout really, or even like 1/2 inch or something steel pipe stub you could silver solder on there with a cap. And again, it doesn't need to be 100% leak tight, although it probably is handy. If this is going to be rolling around in the truck, you don't want it leaking oil everywhere. What you can find is if you you'll pull a vacuum, take a load of refrigerant out or something, it'll sit around for a while, and in the meantime, although it had a vacuum in when you finished, the refrigerant can boil off out of the oil, and you can end up with a few pounds of pressure in there a day or two later, especially if the weather's warmed up. So that's something to be aware of as well. Now the other option is, if you don't want to be messing about drilling holes in bottles and soldering valves on, which I can see a lot of people wouldn't want to do, and also it might not look so professional on the job site if it's something you've made yourself, unless you know. Now this is a scrap recovery tank I've got, because it should have a little shield around here, but the weld's cracked and that's come off, but they'll serve to illustrate point. Now we've already got the 2 taps on here. This one's got a dip tube on it for liquid, and this is the vapor one. So if we were to connect the vacuum pump to this one, we could put a vacuum on the whole tank, and then we could use this one for the oil to go in the same fashion as the one we'd made. All you'd need is your little bit of 1/4 inch copper and a bit of flexible 1/4 inch hose or something off of here. And the better thing with that is this is rated for the pressure, so you could put 50 pounds of nitrogen in there or something to blow the oil out, and you could fill it, shut the tap off, and then empty it quite easily. But obviously you'd have to, if these are about 80 pounds I think for a bottle, it's cheaper to make one if you've got an old one lying about, but that would certainly look a lot more professional than the homemade version.